Okay, welcome to everybody, and I'm wondering if you've been waiting to hear someone speak. It's the top of the hour, so we're going to get going. I had the recorder on, but I didn't have my audio on. I'm Dawn Benson, the moderator of the Canadian School Health Knowledge Network, and I'm welcoming you to the School Health webinar today, How Schools Can Build Student Resiliency Through Developmental Assets and Positive Behavior Support. Today we have people logging in from across Canada and from the Northwest Territories. So welcome to everybody, and I'm just checking to make sure that everybody can use the chat line, that they have that chat box. We're using new software, and so this software only allows us to have very few speakers. We can't have everybody on a conference call line, and so we're asking people at the end to put their questions into the chat box at the left. And just a reminder that this is being recorded, and so people will be able to access it in the future. And as well, all of your chat is in a public chat line, so anything that you have to say, just be aware that others are reading it as well. Because the software doesn't allow you to speak, we would ask that you hold your questions if possible till the end, but if you have to leave early, then type in your question at the left. I will be keeping track of questions for our presenter, and as well we're going to pose our questions up at the wiki board at the end so that other people can see if you missed some of that. So the format is similar to last year. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our presenter, and then he's going to carry on for about 45 minutes with his presentation. And then after that, we'll have some time for questions, and we'll have a closure with Cindy Andrew. And you can see the front picture on the screen that you're now seeing. It looks like me ready to ride a plane. It's just me having to use a headset, which is new for me. So I'm going to move to the second slide, and that tells you who our presenter is today. Don is currently principal of Princess Margaret Secondary School, but before that he was a middle school principal as well. He's a strong believer in taking a pro-social and positive attitude in his work in building resiliency with students. He's been doing this for a long time. He's been receiving a lot of training. The last 8.5 years, he's been working through the Search Institute in Minneapolis. It's a nonprofit organization geared to provide leadership and resources, supporting healthy schools, students, and their communities. He's now a certified trainer for this model, so any of you in BC who might be able to access him, he would be a wonderful resource. Along with this developmental asset model, he incorporates the Positive Behavior Program. Formerly it was EBS, now it's called PBS, which a lot of our schools are using as well. And I can hear the phone ringing. I hope my husband picks it up. I recently spoke at a school trustees meeting, and one of the school board trustees from Don's district told me afterwards what a passionate and enthusiastic educator Don was, and what a great job he was doing for the students at his school. So we're very pleased to begin this year's program from right inside a school, with Don speaking from the office in his school in Penticton. So welcome, Don. I'm going to click off my audio so you won't hear the phone ringing, and it's over to you. Okay, waiting to hear Don. Can you click on the audio at the left?
Good morning, Dawn. Yes, I am here. Still getting used to this new technology. It seems somewhat unusual to be speaking to myself, but I'm just relying on the fact that these people on the screen are actually there and ready to listen. We're going to take a fairly quick look this morning at an overview of some ideas that we've tried to put into practice in the schools in which I've worked, and I think this is a powerful model. I think it has application throughout the school system, and I think let's begin our conversation right now. What we're going to be taking a look at this morning is a model developed by the Search Institute, as Don mentioned. It's an organization of social scientists that began a process about 25 years ago of trying to do some research into what built resiliency in young people. They identified several factors and consider them to be the essential building blocks of human development. I'm going to take you through quickly the categories and then the individual assets, and then we'll start to take a look at how this might be able to impact the work that you do with young people. Our objectives this morning are to become familiar with the connections between the asset framework and student success, to be able to understand how the concept of positive behavior support facilitates asset building in schools, and then asking people to individually and collectively commit to forming and maintaining influential relationships with students wherever they might find them, be it in a school or a community setting. So there are categories both external and internal in terms of assets. The external assets include categories of support, providing empowerment to young people, the need to create boundaries and expectations, and also our need to provide them with opportunities to constructively use their time. These are things that we can influence from outside. The internal assets include categories such as commitment to learning, positive values, helping young people develop social competencies, and perhaps most importantly, helping them develop a sense of positive identity. Now, the next two slides are going to break down these categories into the specific assets, and I will speak to a few of them and explain what information you're seeing on this chart, and also to remind you that all of this information is available through the Search Institute website, which is on the wiki that you'll be able to access. So here we go. The 40 developmental assets under the support category, examples that certainly speak strongly to school settings. For example, asset number 3, the importance of developing other adult relationships. The research suggests that young people need a minimum of 3 adult role models in their lives outside their immediate family in order to make a permanent difference in their feelings about the possibilities of their own success. And from your own experience, you might be able to identify these people very typically in school settings. And it's certainly something that we in schools look carefully at. One I want to draw particular attention to, if this is working the way I hope it is, I am pointing now to asset number 5, caring school climate. The school provides a caring and encouraging environment for young people. Now, if you'll notice over to the right-hand side of the screen, there are a series of percentages that are offered here. I'll put the pointer onto caring school climates here. And what these numbers represent are the percentages of people that there have been in excess of 2 million adolescents that have been surveyed over this type of information, trying to get a sense of what their feelings are within the communities and schools in which they exist about the availability of these types of supports to them personally. Now, obviously, as a school principal, a caring school climate is something that's pretty important to us. What disturbs me is the fact that only 29% of the young people that have reported on this particular asset believe that they exist in an environment where there is this caring school climate. And I have to be honest with you, I take that pretty personally. And so the foundation of the work that I try to do in collection with a lot of other caring and supportive people is try to make sure that we are developing a climate in which students feel that there are possibilities for them to be successful, and there are adults that care about that success in a school environment. Something that's also very important to young people is existing in a community in which they are valued. And once again, if you take a look at the percentages associated with this asset, you're going to see that only 25% of young people who have been surveyed from all across North America and many other countries in the world, we see consistency in this low percentage response. And it does concern me, because outside of the school, are we providing enough opportunities for our young people to feel that what they have to offer in terms of skills and support is valued by the greater community? Certainly in the work I've done with leadership students in the past, this has always been a sort of a bone of contention with young people as well, because they see themselves being portrayed as with negative images, and we have a response in schools that we try to give them a possible alternative or option to consider when they're looking at this kind of information. And so part of what we try to do is make sure that the good work that's going on in schools is not bound by the 4 walls of the physical structure. We try to get our students positioned into our community, show them doing positive and supportive work, so that it begins to change one by one, perhaps, the minds of the individuals that are developing these negative images that come to them through the media sources. Under boundaries and expectations, once again, you'll see the importance of adult role models to young people. We really do need to make sure that wherever we encounter young people, we are acting in a capacity that provides support to them. That in whatever our role is, whether we interact young people infrequently or very frequently, that our own attitudes and behaviors are consistent with what we expect in terms of support that we're willing to provide. Under constructive use of time, the availability of youth programs, options for kids outside of school settings. Now, this is something we try to work with our community on. We have a very strong youth council in our particular city, but it's taken time to develop that, and certainly working between school and community is an important part of sending a consistent message from both school and community that we do have availability and capacity and opportunity for our young people to explore their own success and give them empowerment, which is such an important part of their development. When we look at the the internal category now, these are things that, of course, we can support, but we need the support of community, that we need the support of family, in order to make sure that these kinds of things are going on. Obviously, there are some things here under commitment to learning. You can see that these are things that schools can more directly influence. But we also, in somewhat less direct ways, influence the positive values category as well. We want to make sure that the kids are feeling they exist, that we have a sense of caring for them, that we are demonstrating and encouraging the importance of integrity and honesty, developing responsibility in our students. One that schools are starting to pay much more attention to in terms of category is those of social competencies. And these are things that students are telling us they need work on. They understand that they do not necessarily come equipped with appropriate resistance skills or the ability to peacefully resolve their own conflict. So we try to develop opportunities for them to learn these skills. Things that work very well in school settings, peer counseling and peer mentoring opportunities, where we have older students working with younger students, and we give them a body of knowledge that we ask them to communicate with the people in which they're working with, and give them some tools to put in their toolbox as they negotiate their way through the hallways and classrooms and streets of our community. And we're finding that this is meeting with good success. The most encouraging thing, even though some of these percentage numbers might paint a less than encouraging picture, the thing that I keep coming back to under sense of positive identity is the fact that 74% of students are reporting that they have a positive view of their personal future. And as long as that is such a strong feeling amongst of young people around North America and other parts of the world, I think there is reason to believe that we're making a difference and that we can build successful futures for the young people that we come into contact with. As an example, under the category of boundaries and expectations, young people are telling us a couple of things. One is that they do believe that it is within the mandate of schools and community to develop boundaries and expectations for young people. So what does that look like in a school setting? We try to establish an environment that values respect, that there is support available, and that we create an environment for them that is safe, and that safety is an important consideration. When we are attempting to develop assets within a school setting, we keep coming back to the term engagement. We need to find ways to continue to engage young people in active conversations so that we're constantly looking at what their most immediate need is. Young people, especially at this level, at the secondary level, their future may not extend beyond next week. They don't think in terms of long-term planning. And part of our engagement process with them is to help them bridge the gap between the immediate future and the long-term future, trying to provide them with information and experiences that will help them develop a plan, set goals, and establish their own markers for success in school settings. They come to us having experienced a variety of risk factors, and I'll speak to some of these in a little bit of detail. There can be negative family history. I've had numerous conversations with parents over the years where we've been discussing a student that's at risk for one reason or another, and inevitably what comes up in that conversation is, well, the same thing happened for me when I was in school. And what we're doing there is we're creating a cycle of despair. And so we try to find ways when we engage families in conversations about students that are at risk to focus on some positives and to help them see changes so that they could recognize that it is possible for a family member to have or a child to have more success than the parent may have had, to help to break that cycle for them. And of course we all understand and recognize that as parents we don't receive manuals when our children are born. And we basically experience parenting in one of two very different ways. We either choose to parent our children much the same as we were parented, because that seemed to be successful and worked for us, or the exact opposite is true, is we attempt to parent dramatically differently from the way we were raised, depending on what our experiences were. Those types of management issues inevitably creep into family situations and can affect attitudes and create lower level expectations for young people as they begin to encounter the school system. For the young people themselves, the critical importance of peers. I don't think I can emphasize enough how important it is for young people to feel connected to peers, both inside and outside of school settings. To feel alienation from a peer group is a very traumatic thing for a young person to have to undertake. The need to have friends is a much stronger need than the needs that may be represented by family, the needs that may be represented by school or by other institutions in the community. And we have to accept and understand the strength of that pull if we are going to be able to influence choices and decisions that young people are making. We have to help them to develop appropriate attitudes, because if they begin to take counsel and advice only from peers, that can have a dramatic impact in their experience with high-risk activity, and that's what we're referring to in the comment there that says early first use. In terms of school, sometimes we have policy within our districts and schools that work counterproductively to the types of needs that young people have. Just as an example, and this is something that I've wrestled with my entire career, is I just had a meeting this morning with one of our vice principals over a small group of students that are highly at risk right now because of a very inappropriate attendance pattern. Our response to this traditionally is that we then offer an out-of-school suspension, which is somewhat hypocritical in that they're not attending school regularly in the first place, so our consequence is that we will have them not attend school for a longer period of time and formalize it. At the same time, we have to provide structure. The category of boundaries and expectations comes to mind in this situation, and we have to make sure that students understand that as they make choices, they have to be willing to accept consequences for the choices that they make. I wrestle with it. We try to create flexible scheduling. We try to consider individual circumstances and develop programs that allow us the maximum opportunity to keep kids connected to school, because we realize without that connection we are limiting their opportunities for future success. Our availability and flexibility are very important parts of students feeling connected to their school situation. We have to resist the use of labeling. We have to be conscious of the fact that many of our families are in transition, and we've seen students that have cycled through us multiple times as families find the need to move, mostly for economic reasons, but also other reasons as well. And their involvement outside of school may not support their involvement inside of school, and they can be involved at high-risk activity, which makes it more difficult for them to build a connection to us here within the school system. And I've already mentioned the issue of truancy, which is something that we wrestle with every single year. Within our community, we have cases where we're dealing with poverty, a lack of school involvement on the part of families, even a resistance to wanting to be connected to schools. because of the feeling the only reason the school would call me is if there's something wrong, and I've just dealt with enough wrongness in my life that I would prefer not to have to take this call today. And so it creates a norm within that family that school is not a positive and supportive place, but a place that's going to tell you about what's not working for your son or daughter. And we struggle to find appropriate methods of communication to help families understand that we are here to provide support, but also direction, and that we need to work with families in order to maximize the opportunities for success for students in our schools and communities. This is an example of what the research has shown. Is you take a look along the bottom scale, and you'll see that as the numbers increase, which is a self-report on the part of students about the number of assets that they believe to be active in their own experience. The higher the number of assets that a young person reports, the greater the likelihood that they're experiencing success in school, which is determined by what we would consider to be an above-average GPA or an honor roll standing. They have higher capacity to understand the importance of maintaining personal health. And the diversity item there on the right-hand side is tolerance for a variety of cultures, which is very important in the multicultural societies in which we exist today. Conversely, the greater the number of assets that a young person reports as having active in their life, the less likely it is that they're engaging in high-risk behavior. Those that have been specifically reported on are first use around drugs, sexual experiences, and experiences with violence, whether it be inside or outside of school settings. What I like about this model in general is that it's research-based. I was looking for something in my work as an administrator in schools that could give me a way of reframing my own thinking around the importance of the work that I did. I came from a background where my job was primarily to provide the hammer, lower the boom on students that were not meeting expectations. And what I found was, although I was effective in my work, it was eating away at my soul. What I love about this model is I can defend it through research to anybody that has questions regarding it. There's volumes of information that's available to support the fact that this kind of information is important for us to have access to, especially in school settings, but also in our communities as well. This is something that it's work that we share. It brings to mind the concept of it takes a village to raise a child, and that we all have a role to play in the success of our young people as they transition into the school system and out of the school system. I think the research is valid basically from birth to age about 20 or 21. And I'll show you some connections between students experiencing high levels of assets and other types of success in their lives. Here's an example of this kind of information. The studies have associated specifically the commitment to learning assets, which was one of the categories that we looked at a little bit earlier. And there's either direct or indirect correlation with higher levels of high school completion, more post-secondary involvement, higher grades while students are in high school, achievement scores improve, attendance improves, and early first use with high-risk behavior is reduced. Now, these are all valid reasons to consider exposing yourself to information about the developmental assets model. And for me, this information is simply a filter or a lens that I use to look through when I go about the work that I am assigned within this school and within this district. And it has given me the opportunity to look beyond the obvious and try to, as an administrator, when you don't have as much direct contact with students as teachers might, this is a great thing that I can do to support the good work that's going on in the classrooms of our school. I sort of take it as my responsibility to help build a positive culture, and I build the culture in the hallways. And the reason I do that is I believe that's where the culture exists. The culture exists in those little cracks and crevices and hallways of your school and your grounds. and it governs the conduct of students when there is no adult there to supervise or direct. What is happening in those settings, to me, is the greatest determining factor about whether the culture of your school is positive or negative. And so since I consider that my teaching responsibility within my assignment as an administrator here in the school, is to work on developing assets with students and building relationships with them, to let them know that I am going to be both a role model and a support to them in whatever way I can. Even when it becomes necessary for me to have to redirect or provide consequence as a result of a poor choice or decision that a student has made. I always end those conversations by saying, we've got to get you back here as quick as we can. We have a commitment to see that you graduate from high school, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that that happens, even when you're trying to get in the way of it. And it's a challenge and it's a struggle, but I feel so much better about the work that I do having this information at my fingertips than I did prior to being able to access it. I think differently about my work. I speak to anyone that's willing to listen about the importance of framing things this way. And I believe that I don't use it as a mandate. I don't insist that my staff be in service around this. I've always found it's more successful to use what I refer to as the bubble-up approach. As need arises, I'm there to fill that void with information. And I speak first individually to students, then perhaps to teachers, and then eventually to entire staff. I'm new to this particular assignment, but I've already provided in-service to this school staff 2 different times. So I believe that we're well on the way. And all we're starting to do is develop common terminology so that when we talk about support, when we talk about empowerment, when we talk about culture and climate, we understand what we mean. The differences between the work that we did prior to our exposure to this kind of information is we try to stop thinking about young people as problems and begin to focus on their strengths. The second item here is moving away from professionals' work, and what I mean by that is, don't get me wrong, we will always need to be able to access other professionals in our work here in schools. However, one of the very subtle but strong messages we have sent to the young people in our schools and communities is that we are a quick fix society. We look for opportunities to find quick solutions to problems that present themselves. And sometimes we are quick to refer to other professionals as a method to resolve these problems as quickly as possible. I'll give you one example from a personal experience. I sat in with a new teacher at a parent-teacher conferences one evening. And during the course of the conversation this teacher was having with a parent about a child that was at risk both academically and behaviorally, the teacher made a comment that said, perhaps you should consider putting your child on Ritalin. Now, my heart rate probably doubled instantly. I could tell from the parent's response that she was uncomfortable with the information. The teacher backpedaled a little bit, negotiated their way through the rest of the interview, and then when the evening was over, I took the opportunity to meet with the teacher. And it's important that you approach these things in a positive manner because, you know, beginning teachers are a lot like new students, is their confidence level can be eggshell thick. So I basically engaged her in a conversation where I said, I didn't know that you had a medical degree. And she didn't quite get what I was meaning initially, and then I said, I think we want to steer clear of providing medical advice to parents. And she said, yeah, I realized when I said that it probably didn't come out right, but I'm frustrated because I don't see any change occurring in the student's behavior. So we worked our way through a process where we could build a bond and a connection to that parent because we only see these students for 5 3/4 hours a day. Parents live with them. They're not at all blind to the fact that behavioral issues or academic issues may exist. We need to work together to find a solution rather than building a wall between the school and the family when we share the common need to see that a student finds success. So I like to frame it that way and think of it as everyone's work as opposed to just the work of a select group of professionals. We continue to employ them as needed, but we have to think of it as work that we're all responsible for. I get frustrated when I hear people talk about the number of resources that young people absorb. That is our purpose here in the school system, is to provide resources and support. And I think we need to also think about young people as resources as well. Examples of this in school settings are, as I've mentioned earlier, peer counseling and peer mentoring programs. One of the most empowering experiences for a young person is to provide mentorship. And older students always have the opportunity to work with younger students in our school in formalized and less formalized settings. We, for example, this year have started a transition program where we assign one senior student to a group of 6 freshmen. And then we create structured opportunities for them to meet, to talk about questions that we will sometimes provide as we try to get a handle on what our freshmen are feeling about their experience in the new high school setting. And then we use that information to govern and guide us as we prepare opportunities and activities for our freshman students. So it's part of a transition program, and it's working so well because our senior students really enjoy the opportunity of working with freshmen. We have to stop talking about troubled young people. They have always existed and will continue to exist in our schools and community. If we just talk about all young people and put supports in place that can benefit anyone, I think we are going to minimize the gaps that people can fall through. One of the more difficult ones to deal with is the next item on this slide, and that is moving from being accountable for our own behavior to also being accountable for the behavior of other adults. How this typically can play out in a school setting is teacher A is berating a student in the hallway in a manner that makes teacher B, who walks by, very uncomfortable. Now, this is an awkward situation. These people are colleagues, they're both professionals, yet there is something inside the teacher who observed this interaction that says what happened here wasn't right. Moving from understanding that there's a problem to taking action to see that it doesn't occur is an important step in a school that is dealing with trying to develop a positive school climate and culture. Now, there are a couple of things that can be done in this kind of a situation. It can be reported to an administrator. If you have the type of relationship with this colleague that you could call them on it directly, you might be able to do that. But here's the downside. If you choose to do nothing, it is the same thing as saying, what just happened here is okay. And I talk to young people about this all the time, is whatever the issue happens to be in the hallways of your school, if you tolerate inappropriate conduct, it is the same thing as sending the message that that is okay. And I do not think that that's the message that we want to send. Helping to support people who want to move in that direction is a big part of what my responsibility and the responsibility of the administrative team in any school has to take ownership of. And that is making sure that we are not doing things to hurt students. And the emotional scarring that can be left behind, the innocent, what may seem like an innocent conversation, can become very, very damaging for a student. I think part of the reason that I am so focused around this particular issue is from experience with my own son, who struggled through high school, didn't feel connected because he did not find enough adult role models that he was comfortable with. Trying to help him overcome that was a major challenge for his mother and I. But what we came to believe as a result is we needed to help him to build bridges. We also needed to make sure that in our own capacity, since my wife is an elementary school teacher, that we never allowed that to happen in our presence, and to try to encourage other people to take the same attitude. I was once doing a workshop up in Ketchikan, Alaska for a group of parents. I had done a workshop with the staff during the day, and then a small but interested group of parents came that evening to the library to discuss how this might impact their community. One of the people there was a young mother, probably 25 or 26 years old, with about a 4-month-old baby. And she was asking some very pointed questions around what support and resources would be available for her children as they grew in this community. And through the conversation, a question came up, and that is, what do you do in this situation? What do you do in a community situation where you encounter something that just doesn't sit right with you? And one of the mothers in the group told us this story. She said, I was once in a grocery store, and I noticed a mother with 3 children hanging off a grocery cart. And I was following her down the aisles, and as she was putting items into the basket, one of the children was tossing them out the other side. So when she got to the end of the row, she realized that the shopping she thought she had done, in fact, was not represented in the cart. She was very frustrated, and she reached out and grabbed one of her children, pulled him quite hard by the arm and off the cart. This woman said, "I witnessed this, and it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't know what to do." And I was stuck, to be honest. I was stuck for an answer. I'd never been asked that question before. I was familiar with school settings and the kinds of advice and counsel that I had given to adults in those situations, but I had never encountered it in that way in a community. And one of the other people at the meeting said, "I encountered something very similar once, not too long ago, in this very same town." And what she said she did, and she said it was instinctual. And she said, "I knew that I didn't want to make it worse, so I didn't think it'd be appropriate to chastise the mother for being a poor parent when she's already frustrated by the situation. What she needed was support." And so she said, "What I did is I reached out to her. I put my hand on her shoulder, and I said, 'Sounds like you're having a really bad day.'" She offered to take the children, look after them as Mom completed the shopping. Now that's one example, that's one incident, but it speaks volumes to the type of community that this person wanted to live in. So we then began to share other examples and talk about appropriate responses, but they were all governed by the same thing, the need to provide support and not to be critical. And if we can do that for each other as adults, we have to find ways to do that for each other when we work with young people too. Those of you that are listening to this today are already asset builders. You may not be familiar with some of the terminology, but you're certainly understanding and accepting of the responsibility that we have collectively to raise healthy and successful children. All this information is trying to help you do is make your work more intentional. Your familiarity with the framework of developmental assets can serve you in whatever capacity you deal with young people. But I encourage you to continue to do the work. I know oftentimes it comes without significant recognition. As a classroom teacher for years before I became an administrator, it was not a common experience to have students come to me at the end of a year and say, "You know, Mr. McIntyre, I just want to tell you that my experience in being in your classroom in this past year has been enlightening. And I think as I reflect on my future, I will always think of the impact that you've made on my life." That happens to us occasionally, but not often enough. And I think we need to find counsel in the fact that those stories are being told, even if we're not witness to them. Finally, on this slide, we have to stop blaming each other for the problems that our young people experience. We need to begin to claim responsibility for their success. I'm going to ask you just to reflect for a minute or two. This is a little bit different for me in that I can't interact with you, which is such an important part of sharing information like this. But I'm going to ask you to just take a minute now and reflect back on your own experience as a young person. Put yourself back and say your 14-year-old mind. Think of where you were. If you can identify someone who provided that support, that adult role modeling that you needed, try to look outside your immediate family. You can find these people in settings that you might commonly experience: teams, clubs, classrooms, community organizations. But there, I hope, was more than one person who was there for you. When I do workshops with adults and with young people, at this particular point, one of the challenges I offer to them is, if you can identify this person quite clearly, if you remember a lot about the experience that you shared, and in particular, if you still have access, if this is somebody that is still in your community, it's a very powerful thing to do, is to contact them and to let them know the difference that they made. If everybody did that, for one person, we keep those stories alive, and we honor the work that those people did. So as you're reflecting on this person now, see if you can take that challenge and make it concrete for the person that you're thinking of. Now, let's connect this to a framework or a structure that is fairly common in school settings. I came across this quite accidentally in an assignment that I was given. Positive behavior support just has so many dovetailed connections to developmental assets that it seemed to be a natural fit. And so I started to work with these complementary structures in schools in which I've been a part, and we found it to be quite consistent in terms of what it is we're trying to accomplish. So what is PBS? Well, it's positive behavior support. It used to be called effective behavior support. It's the same thing. I don't like to refer to it as a program because, once again, it's very strongly research-based. It's both systemic and individualized strategies for achieving social and learning outcomes while attempting to prevent problem behaviors. The critical thing here is the fact that it deals with all students. And I think that this is really important. It's not just a structure that's designed to provide support or direction to those that struggle with good choices. It's designed to provide a framework that supports every single student in the setting. And that's, I think, what makes it so powerful. What it does is it enables and empowers schools to have the opportunity to educate every student we deal with, including those that represent challenging behaviors. It's not a curriculum, it's not a practice, it's a general approach, as is developmental assets, and it's not limited to a particular group of students. It's based on good instructional practice, behavioral practices, and designs and strategies that are very common in school settings. We can use these strategies for a number of reasons. We've just chosen to take this type of approach around behavioral concerns. So here's the things that we know. We know for the most part that kids require attention from adults in school settings. The questions we have to ask ourselves is, if students demonstrate positive behavior, does that guarantee that they're going to get attention from adults? As you reflect on this question, I'm going to suggest to you that it does not necessarily guarantee that students will get attention from the teachers in their classrooms. However, when we begin to look at negative behavior, we can virtually guarantee that if a student acts out in a negative way, it is going to draw attention from the teacher. Now, in a young person's mind, there's not a lot of difference between the positive and the negative, especially if the goal or the outcome is to get the teacher's attention. They're going to try to do it in the most effective way possible. We need to be aware of that and then plan for it. So we have to work smarter. Are we being efficient in our use of minutes? Are we being effective? Are the strategies we're choosing to use resulting in the outcomes we're looking to achieve? We need to know what those outcomes are supposed to be if we're going to attempt to influence them in a positive way. And is what we're doing relevant? Does it speak to what the current needs and expectations of the student community and the adult community in schools requires? What does it look like in a school? The diagram may seem complicated, but it really isn't. And I'll speak to certain parts of it. First of all, as I mentioned already, you have to know what the outcomes are that you're attempting to achieve. So you sit down with a like-minded group of people and say, okay, what types of behaviors are we expecting to see from the students in our school? Then you have to take a look at the data that you have within your school setting that will help you to determine where your greatest need may be. For example, if you find that the majority of your disciplinary incidents are beginning in hallways, then you have to collect that data in order to know what you want to do in response to that information. So things have to begin with some type of data collection. You need to know what it is you are going to measure before you can determine what your outcomes are going to be. Then you discuss the idea of practices. What practices can we put in place that will help us to get to the outcomes we're attempting to achieve? And then finally take those practices and develop them into systems that are used school-wide. Outside of the outcomes in the circle that we've, hang on here. There we go. Sorry, I lost you for a minute. Outside of the outcome circle that contains these three subsets, we have to talk about the need to develop social competence and academic achievement, to create supporting decision-making opportunities, to support appropriate student behavior, and to develop appropriate staff behavior. So here's what it looks like in a diagram. What we know is whatever guidelines, I don't like the word rules, I prefer to use the term guidelines. Whatever guidelines we choose to enact in a school setting, as a method of primary prevention, you can pretty much guarantee that about 80% of the students in the school will comply as soon as they become aware of what the purpose of the guideline is, if we take the time to explain the need for it. Students need to understand and participate in a discussion that develops these guidelines in school settings. And depending on the level, the amount of involvement is going to change. In high school settings, in the beginning of the year, I encourage staff members to have conversations with their classrooms and the students in them to talk about what do we need from each other. It begins with almost a classroom constitution, formalizing of the expectations that students have of teachers and that teachers have of students. Then we have to extend that conversation to govern the public areas of our schools, so that we have reference points for students when they're not under the direct supervision of an adult in a school setting. When we put those things in place, whatever it is we choose to do, we can pretty much be assured that about 80% of the students will comply. For the remaining 20%, we may deem them to be at risk for complying. They may require a second reminder, they may require a one-on-one discussion with a teacher or an administrator or a counselor. And then once they receive that secondary intervention, they may move down into that green area of the triangle and move your 80% to a higher percentage. And that's what we would hope would happen. For the remaining 5%, and every school has a term for kids at the top of this triangle. They can be called the high flyers. They can be called those in the red zone. Whoever they happen to be, they exist in all school settings. For them, we require tertiary prevention. These are most often students that are already on individualized educational plans, but they are going to need an individual plan to help govern their conduct. They are going to need to have predictable intervention. We are going to need to understand what their triggers are and how we might help to address those situations so that we're not triggering or escalating behavior when we deal with these students. Having a plan, a proactive plan, is a great way of reducing the incidence of misbehavior or inappropriate conduct with these students. So let's step back from this for just a little bit now and talk about the settings in which these kinds of guidelines need to be produced. First of all, as we've mentioned already, we have classroom setting systems. And I want whatever those discussions are at the classroom level to be similar to the discussions that will govern our guidelines in all settings in our school. And in order to do that, you have to put students in those settings and then talk about what makes sense in terms of the way they should be interacting with each other and with us as adults. But the first step in that is to talk about classroom settings. Now, part of that conversation is going to lead us to a discussion about individual student systems. This is where we have guidelines that are clearly established, published, and discussed so that every student in every setting of their school knows what is expected of them. It is not something that we can say, well, we've always done it this way in school, or you should know that because you're a senior, you've been in the building for 3 or 4 years. No. Every year we start with the assumption that students do not know anything that we have not taught them. If we expect them to respond in predictable ways, we have to make sure that we have taken the time to have that conversation. And of course, beyond that, we have to provide a similar type of experience in non-classroom settings. That would be what I refer to as the public areas of the school. We put these three systems together and they create what we would call our school-wide system or our school-wide response. my experience has been is that students willingly engage in these kinds of conversations. Once they have an understanding for the need behind the guideline, most are very willing to comply, and I'm wanting to take it even a step beyond that, to move to not only individual compliance, but students supporting and reminding each other of the expectation. For example, in this particular assignment, I'm assigned all of the students that are on what we call approved study blocks. These are blocks of time where students are not assigned a particular class, and primarily they're used for academic support. These students need to report to me to let me know what it is that they're doing and working on at the time. And then together we decide where the most appropriate setting for that work to take place is going to be. I have found that not only are students willing to engage me in that conversation, but they're willing to remind each other of the expectation. If they notice that a classmate may be moving in a direction that they shouldn't be, they'll say, don't forget what the expectation is around that. Now, of course, they use their own terminology and language, but they effectively communicate the same message. That's what starts to breed a more appropriate culture in schools, is when students not only comply, but understand to the level that they're willing to share that with other students who may be heading in the wrong direction. What I like about this triangle and the percentages that we've referred to is I think it can be used in response to most issues that we encounter in school settings. That's why I sort of juxtaposed these two triangles, one to deal with academic systems, and the other, which we've been talking about, is dealing with behavioral systems. No matter which of the goals you are attempting to pursue side on, you can use this same structure or strategy. It begins with the need to get a small group of people within your setting to have a conversation about what they need to do in order to achieve the outcomes they're looking for. And how are we going to engage students in that conversation? How are we going to respond to those that need a secondary reminder? And what are we going to do for those individual students that are going to need an individual plan in order to maximize the opportunities for success for them? It's simple to explain. It's easy to work through. It gives you a focus and both a starting point and sort of an end point. And it cycles back as you collect more data that affects any required changes that you may want to make to your individual systems or your school-wide systems. I just like the way it looks, and in one slide it paints a pretty clear picture for people. The last major topic I really want to deal with is giving people some structure around how they can form influential relationships with young people. For many people that I've worked with, this is an automatic. This is something that they just intuitively know how to do. But as I've gained more experience as an administrator, I've discovered that there are also a large number of teachers that this isn't natural for. And their knowledge of their curriculum area and their content has been the driving force in their teaching experience. And that means that perhaps they have not had the type of successful experience they would like to have with the young people that they're working with. They're motivated by wanting to have successful students in their classrooms, but they're struggling to find ways to build those connections. And by the way, this particular slide and this idea, I speak as much to students' need to do this with teachers as I do with teachers needing to have this information for students. So let's just work through it here quickly. Level 1. Basic understanding is making connection. That can begin by using a young person's name. If you've ever been in a school or community setting where there's a lot of young people, you know that there's basically two things you see in this setting. Is in a high school setting, it's possible that a teacher would be responsible for 150 different students. Some of them know the names of every student in their class by the end of the first month of school. Others take until Christmas. That's an indication of the level of relationship that a person may be experiencing with the students that they work with. So if I tell them, well, begin by building a level 1 relationship, just get to know their names. It is amazing what a difference that makes to somebody that may be looking for a connection to their school setting. Level 2, get to know young people. Learn something personal about them. Level 3, identify and encourage their strengths and talents as you talk, listen, and observe. Once you get beyond that, now you're beginning to challenge young people, help them set goals, follow through with affirmation, acknowledge rules and consequences. At level 5, you are beginning to focus on building specific assets based on what you believe the needs of those young people are. And finally, and most importantly, you have the opportunity to maintain relationships with students you've come into contact with. You will not get to level 6 with every relationship that you encounter, but being aware that there are levels will help you to take it to that next step. Here's what it can look like in school settings. Speak to students in private. Explain what you saw or heard rather than challenging or accusing. Say what you value about the student, even if you're going to have a conversation with a negative outcome. Try to help understand the reason for the behavior. Give them options in terms of if you encounter this again, this is what you're going to have to consider. Determine consequences together. The last two can probably more clearly be done by an administrator because a teacher may not have time. But I always try to end by thanking the student for the conversation. It just builds a bridge to the next conversation I might need to have. Physically in schools, here's what it looks like. The last item here, physical environment, warm and inviting, is something I think is very, very important. What it looks like is what it feels like when a guest walks through the door. I'm always conscious of that in any school that I work at. My email address is there. I know that this has been very quick. If you have any questions or require any follow-up, please don't hesitate to use my email address to contact me. Thank you.
Over to Cindy Andrews.
Thanks, Dawn, well, actually, thank you, Dawn and Dawn, thanks to those of you who were able to join us today. I wondered, we are limited in terms of the number of microphones, but rather we would encourage you, if you have specific questions or comments, to enter them in the chat box that you can see underneath. There's currently text there. Dawn was the last one saying, "Questions, anyone?" That being said, I don't see any at this point, and just wanted to reiterate, Dawn. First of all, I'm pleased as I listen to you present and know that so many of us probably have the benefit of connecting with people like you who share in this in an appreciation and an understanding of the importance of an asset-based focus and its significance not only to the health and well-being of the children that we're reaching, but ultimately their academic performance as well, of course. So I applaud your efforts and those of many others who we all work with in taking that. And I think, you know, your comment about an intentional use of this framework, and to really not even almost see it as a framework, but just as a culture and the way we do business, can't be taken for granted. I think, you know, certainly it's something I think intuitively we all say yes, makes sense, but there are some very practical strategies and things we could all do to help further the uptake of this type of approach, and thank you for sharing some of what's worked so well with you. Just a reminder for those on the call today, Dawn will be sending out as per our previous webinars, related information and resources, etc., that we think are very helpful in regard to looking at an asset-based approach to health and social well-being and learning of kids. The format we're using this year is a wiki, and that basically means an online shared filing cabinet, if you will. And so this webinar-specific wiki offers a lot more, but we know that there is probably some excellent information and resources that you folks have that you would like to share with others, and so we encourage you to share those by contributing to this this online shared filing cabinet /wiki. So watch for that note. That will be coming to you. And in terms of future webinars, we have several that are very relevant for folks, certainly some in a variety of different specific issue areas. Substance abuse is certainly one, and this type of approach we know dovetails and has a lot of commonalities to a variety of recommended and evidence-informed approaches to a multiple of health and social issues. So Dawn will be sending out the upcoming webinar list, and certainly I would encourage you to join us again. The webinars will be posted. You'll have a link to that as well, and so that will serve as a reminder and perhaps something you could share with others that you're working with. So finally, again, Dawn McIntyre, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and your desire and ability to share it. We really appreciate you taking the time to do so. And Dawn Benson, thank you so much for your moderating and technology support. Much appreciated. Thanks, everyone.
And just as you're closing off, some of you may not have heard of the 40 developmental assets before. The wiki link that you will get will give you a copy of this PowerPoint so you can see them, and as well a link at the top, Search Institute, which lists all the assets as well. So if this was just a first glance for you of that whole approach, there will be support material coming. So thanks again, Dawn, for sharing that with us. Thank you, all of you, for joining us on our first School Health webinar, and look forward to seeing your name again. Many thanks. If you want to know how to leave, you go up to the file at the top and then hit exit, and that gets you out of this room. Thanks.